It was midnight when the knock landed like a verdict. Short. Sharp. My neighbor's voice trembled, and then came a confession that would ripple through our home for months. Listen close. This isn't a simple secret. In a moment you'll see why what he said rewired every assumption we had about trust, money, and parenthood. Stay with me. The first detail sounds small, but it changes everything. What would you do if a stranger standing at your doorway handed you a life you didn't know you owned? We were wrapping up dinner when the knock interrupted the clink of forks. My sister froze. My dad squinted through the peephole. Short sentence. Long sentence. The man outside, Mr. Harlan, polite 40-something, always mowing at 7 a.m., said 3 words that rerouted our family history and forced us to reevaluate a decade of smiling Sundays and buried receipts. Here's the catch. The confession wasn't about crime or scandal. It was quieter, and therefore, more explosive. In a moment you'll understand why quiet is sometimes more damaging than loud. Mr. Harlan was the kind of renter who kept to his lawn and his mailbox. He smiled at birthdays from across the hedge. Short sentence. Then he confessed something bizarre. He had been depositing envelopes into our mailbox for years. Not junk, not flyers, but letters addressed in my mother's tidy handwriting. In a moment you'll see why those letters cracked everything open. Why would a neighbor be doing that? Small detail. Huge implication. Keep watching. Later you'll hear the voicemail that rewrote his motive. Mom put down her fork. Dad's knee began to shake. Silence stretched. The knock sounded again, urgent this time. Mr. Harlan handed over an envelope stamped with our family return address. Short sentence. Long sentence. Inside were Polaroids, a faded bill, and a scribbled note referencing a name we hadn't heard since before I was born. And that one name turns out to be the hinge our whole family swings on. Stay for the last scene where we trace that name back to a decision my grandparents made. He said, "I think your mother doesn't know." Pause. The room tilted. Short, hard sentence. Long sentence. He explained that for years he'd been quietly redirecting pieces of our mail to someone else. Something meant to protect but which actually hid a different truth. My mother had been living under a false assumption about her relationship and the money tied to it, and that assumption had shaped every choice she'd made, from which house to buy, to who to trust with our savings. Curious? Wait. The following scene reveals the note that started it all. We spread out dusty pictures on the coffee table. My grandmother in a 1970s dress. My dad with a grin. One photo had a man in the background, who looked like Mr. Harlan. Short sentence. Long sentence. Comparing that grainy snapshot to the recent Polaroid from the envelope, we found a striking match. The same scar on the eyebrow, the same tilt of chin. And suddenly the neighbor's confessions stopped being an isolated weirdness and became evidence of decades-long overlap between our lives. In a moment you'll see the photo that broke our assumptions. We found receipts hidden in a hollowed-out cookbook. A bank transfer from years ago. Short, punchy fact. Longer sentence. Those documents showed a recurring payment to a name that wasn't on our family tree, and once we matched dates we noticed patterns. Hospital visits, late-night calls, a holiday trip canceled the same week, money moved. Details that hinted at care, obligation, or a secret agreement. And in a moment you'll see why each receipt tightened the noose around a different family myth. She read the note and then sat down slowly, like the legs beneath her had been pulled out. Short sentence. Long sentence. My mother, stoic, the person who had kept birthdays and bills balanced for 30 years, dissolved into a silence filled with questions about identity, about decisions made for her, and about why someone she trusted had been shaping her life in private. Watch for the moment she asks the first impossible question, because her voice reveals the depth of the betrayal and sets up the confrontation to come. Dad slammed the door. That's him. Quick. Raw. Long sentence. His anger wasn't just about the neighbor or the money. It was about the realization that someone had been making choices for the family without transparency, and that his role as protector had been undermined by polite secrecy. Will he return? In a moment you'll see where he goes and what he finds. And that search leads to an unexpected clue that changes the direction of this story entirely. Mr. Harlan sat on our porch like someone who'd rehearsed every word. He said he was helping, that there were promises he couldn't ignore. Short punch. Longer sentence. His explanation, that he had been delivering updates about an old family friend, safeguarding letters because they meant too much, raised more questions than it answered, especially when he hinted at a legal promise made decades ago, and in a moment you'll hear the line that made us question not only his motives, but the invisible agreements binding our family. We began to cross-check years of small inconsistencies, calendar entries, a vacation skipped, a hospital bracelet forgotten. Small details, long sentence. Each contradiction looked innocent alone, but stacked together, they mapped a pattern of intervention, someone nudging decisions and redirecting outcomes, and that pattern forced us to ask whether the neighbor was protecting the family or manipulating it. Stay tuned because the next discovery makes his intentions shockingly specific. I started a quiet search. Not cops, not lawyers. Just me, late night digging. Short sentence, long sentence. I called banks, compared mortgage dates, and spoke with distant relatives. A deliberate, low-profile attempt to piece together what had been redirected from our view. And by tracing a few small transactions, I opened a door that would reveal who stood to gain from keeping my mother in the dark. In a moment you'll see the surprising name that flips our story again. An old voicemail changed everything. It was my grandmother's voice, recorded years ago, and she mentioned a promise to someone named Elias. Short punch, longer sentence. That single message reframed every oddity. The envelopes, the payments, the polite neighbor with a scar. Because it revealed the promise was written into the family fabric, an unpaid moral debt passed like an heirloom. And in a moment you'll hear how this discovery forces us to reevaluate who deserved our anger and who deserved our compassion. We found Elias walking by the park. Rain soaked his coat. Short sentence, long sentence. In that brief, dripping confrontation, my voice shaking, his eyes steady, he confirmed he had been the hidden figure in our photographs and the beneficiary of small transfers meant to support him after an accident. Yet his presence introduced a moral puzzle. Was he owed secrecy, or did he profit from our ignorance? And in a moment you'll hear the line he said that split our family into factions. My cousin, who'd been estranged for years, returned with a shoebox of documents. Surprise? Small sentence, longer sentence. Inside were letters between my grandmother and Elias revealing a compassionate agreement, money sent discreetly to cover medical care and debt, but also a petition my grandparents had filed to appoint a conservator, and those legal papers explained why secrecy felt necessary then and dangerous now. Stay for the next scene where we decide whether to honor the old pact or rewrite the rules for the present. Lawyers arrived the next week. Letters arrived in blue envelopes. Short, tense sentence, long sentence. Suddenly our household was balancing law and memory. The confidential transfers might have been legally questionable, but they were also acts of care born of a different time, and deciding whether to pursue legal action felt like attacking my grandmother's kindness. In a moment you'll see the line from the conservator paperwork that forced us to choose between restitution and reconciliation. We realized the confession didn't just reveal a secret, it created consequences that spread like cracks. Detail. Short sentence, longer sentence. Unpaid debts, misallocated inheritance, and a neighbor's protective choices had ripple effects. A postponed surgery, a missed job opportunity, and a relationship strained beyond repair. The small truth, that someone tried to fix things quietly, turned into a big problem once the repairs involved other people's lives, and in a moment you'll see how one small decision cascaded into months of fallout. We started with an honest meeting table. No accusations first. Short sentence, long sentence. Over weeks we mapped what happened, who knew what, and why silence had felt easier than confrontation, and step by step, with receipts spread like bones on a table, we rebuilt a version of trust that allowed for apology, boundaries, and a plan to make amends. Stay until the end to see the ritual we created to mark that change and why it mattered more than a court ruling. Here's the recap. A midnight confession revealed decades of quiet decisions, evidence tied to a name, and motives that mixed care and control. Short punch, long sentence. We learned that secrecy can be an act of love or domination depending on the context, that paperwork matters as much as intention, and that healing required both legal clarity and emotional forgiveness. So the key takeaway is this. Transparency beats protective silence every time. but applied with empathy, not vengeance. In a moment you'll hear the single rule we now live by. If you've made it this far, thank you. Here's the call to action. Talk to your family about small, unexplained favors, check old documents, and ask one question tonight. Who could be quietly shaping your life? Short prompt, long sentence. Subscribe for the full timeline and documents we'll release in the follow-up episode, and please leave a comment about a secret that changed you. We'll read the best and bring one story into the next chapter to show how ordinary people rebuild after extraordinary confessions. So stay for that reveal.